I'm Rachel, I am the nerdy homeschooler, I am a second generation homeschooler, and I want to ask any of my viewers here who have been in the homeschool world for a couple decades, have you also noticed a shift in homeschool culture? And what do you think about that shift? I would also question, do you think this shift is a very real shift, or is it more of a how things look on social media shift? These are questions. I'd love to discuss them with you. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. But here I'm going to talk about the shift that I have noticed specifically on social media. I'm going to give you my backstory and I'm going to talk a little bit about this shift and how I've seen homeschool culture to change over the decades. I was homeschooled in what would probably be considered the pioneer era of homeschooling. My parents and others were determined to demonstrate through faithful work that homeschooling was a viable way to provide an education to children at home. In my family, there was no question of being behind our traditionally schooled peers. How could a commitment to excellent education at home ever result in students who were behind where they would be if they were in a classroom? My parents were confident that we did not receive an inferior education because we didn't. But the wider homeschool community did tend in this same direction at this time. On this channel, I have wholeheartedly embraced the nerdy homeschooler stereotype. But that stereotype exists exactly because of my generation of homeschoolers. These were kids who knew their Latin and their rocks. They knew the periodic table of the elements. They may not have been as keyed into 90s and 2000s pop culture, but we were publishing our own family newsletters and reading endless stacks of books. I remember applying for a Sunlight Scholarship when I was about to head off to college, and my mom telling me that because this scholarship, unlike the others I had applied for, because this one was only open to homeschooled students, that it would probably be a lot more competitive and tougher to get it, so I might not win it. So I want to know how we shifted from that culture, which deeply valued education within the family, to the current popular reputation or view of homeschool as it is portrayed through many conversations on social media. We're getting all sorts of dramatic statements these days, statements that might justifiably lead one to wonder how much homeschool families really care about education anymore. I want to make this clear. I do not believe that children are best served by lowering the bar. I understand why a child in his immaturity might want the bar lowered. Putting in less effort and doing easy things is a lot more comfortable than actually stretching yourself. But I don't understand why a parent would look at this child that they love and decide that lowering the standards or lowering the bar is the best possible thing that they can do for their child and for their future. Because I would want to give my child the precious experience of actually stretching to do hard things. That actual painful stretching that comes from doing only things that are truly hard for them. So what are some of these statements and advice that betray a lower value for the training of the heart and mind? Well, one of them is the pervasive advice to don't use any curriculum and no parent-led structured learning under age 6. Now, I suspect that this advice perhaps comes from a bit of a misunderstanding of what the educator Charlotte Mason said about children under age 6, and perhaps a bit of disagreement or misunderstandings about what formal education is. I am no Charlotte Mason expert, but I actually suspect she actually had some reasonably high expectations of young children, and she thought that they were capable human beings too, just that the particular specifics of her type of formal lessons were not designed for young children, and different sorts of lessons might better suit them. But to me, this advice always feels like some sort of vote of no or low confidence in the capabilities of young children. And I think these capabilities are immense. Young children are total sponges. They love time with mama one-on-one. They love big kid tools and big kid responsibilities. Very, very good fruit grows from these early learning routines. To me, there's practically no downside to early learning, to starting before age 6, to having intentional learning routines in our days. And I would love homeschool culture to shift away from discouraging young moms from beginning early learning routines with their kids. And if I could single-handedly shift homeschool culture away from this advice, I would. The second statement that does concern me about homeschool culture are things like this. I only do such and such a subject when my student wants to or asks for it. Or I picked this subject because it's what they wanted to study and what they were interested in. Now, I'm not saying that we should ignore what our children's wants or their interests are, but the wants of young children are not primarily what education is about. Yes, high schoolers should be helping shape their courses of study to help prepare themselves for what career they are interested in. But especially when it comes to young children, they don't actually know what's worth learning about yet from an educational standpoint. Education is for the shaping of the heart and mind. Education is for the ordering of the affections. It is for exposing children to new loves that they would have never known were worth loving if we had never introduced these. Also, to me, the great downside of catering an education to a child's interests and passions is that children tend to be very, very good at learning about their interests and their passions all on their own. My kids have had very intense interests. We've had the dinosaur phase. We are still currently in the chess phase. We're currently in a stocks and bonds phase. We get these very intense interests, and you know what? I don't shape my school around those interests. I trust my kids that in these areas where they have these passions and interests, they are totally capable of learning about these, of soaking in the information, of learning all of this on their own. These are the areas where I can kind of say, hey, I don't have to teach about those because they did take that self-education and run with it. But there's other areas that they might not naturally bump into on their own. There's other areas that I know the value of through my wisdom and maturity and experience. I know the value of these areas that my children might not have known enough to be interested in, and so I introduce those and I shape their education in that way. So I would never want to limit or cater an education focused on a young child's interests. I do think there are downsides to that, and I do think it can limit them. And then there are so many messages like, it's okay, fill in the blank. It's okay if your child doesn't know their multiplication facts. It's okay if they can't read. It's okay, fill in the blank, ad infinitum. Everything is okay, I guess. Or grace. Everything is okay because of grace. We have all these buzzwords. It's okay, mama. Grace, flexibility. And we use them so much that it kind of seems like they don't even mean anything anymore. The message feels like it boils down to you don't really have to do the hard work if you don't want to. And I don't think that's really what's intended, but it starts to be what it sounds like. And I do think that's the message that some younger and inexperienced moms are taking in. But that is not grace. Grace does not mean do whatever you want and everything will somehow magically turn out good in the end. Behind the scenes, I strongly suspect that some of these very people, some of these very same voices that are peddling messages like, it's okay, mama, if your 8 or 9-year-old isn't reading yet, give yourself grace, give your student grace. I suspect that some of the very same people who are giving those messages, if they had a child who was 8 or 9 years old and wasn't reading, they wouldn't be stopping at this meaningless grace. They would be doing their due diligence. They would be finding a tutor. They would be troubleshooting and problem solving and doing the actual work because that is an actual problem that can be addressed and that needs to be addressed. But this message of it's okay, mama, and grace is so trendy and it's so shareable and it's so meaninglessly encouraging that it goes viral and it becomes the bigger picture. Whereas people who could actually give practical advice and meaningful help, maybe those messages are not nearly so easy to share. I actually think that this message of it's okay and grace, mama, grace, kind of leaves the impression that when we identify real issues in our homeschool, that there's nothing that can actually be done about them. And that feels like the most hopeless message ever. But I am not here to leave you with a hopeless message. I'm not here to leave you with a hopeless message about homeschool culture, because if homeschool culture can shift in one direction, it can shift again. And I'm here to give you the message, don't be afraid to give your children a really excellent education. Don't let internet comments dissuade you from the value of hard work and of the training of the heart and mind. It is more than okay. It is indeed good for us to do the hard work of pursuing an excellent education for our children in the context of a home and family. All right, I will see you next time. If you enjoy my videos, remember you can subscribe to the Nerdy Homeschooler for more. I am always here having these nerdy conversations every week. And I'll see you next time. Bye.